What if the very person welcomed into the royal family as a symbol of change turned out to be its greatest threat from within? Imagine discovering that the private conversations of the monarchy, the sacred trust behind palace walls, were being secretly recorded, not by an outsider, but by a duchess. And now, after Princess Anne's chilling revelation, the palace has made a move so final, so irreversible, it has shaken the monarchy to its core. Is this the end of Meghan Markle's royal story, or just the beginning of something even more dangerous? It was one of those mornings in which everything on the surface appeared poised and polished. The grand halls of Buckingham Palace, as always, buzzed softly with the orchestration of royal life, staff bustling between offices, secretaries confirming afternoon schedules, and chefs preparing delicacies for lunch meetings. But beneath that dignified calm, something was brewing, something that would ignite a firestorm within the walls of the royal household, the kind not seen since the days of Edward VIII's abdication scandal. And at the center of it all stood a single revelation: someone had dared to breach the sanctity of royal privacy. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. And that someone was Meghan Markle. To understand the gravity of the moment, one must first understand the centuries-old code of the British royal family. It's a code that doesn't just rest on tradition, it survives because of discretion. The power of the monarchy lies not in legislation or war but in image, mystique, and unshakable control over the narrative. Behind those grand doors, conversations remain confidential. Meetings are unrecorded. Trust is implicit, sacred. So when Princess Anne, a woman known not for flair but for fortitude, walked into a private meeting with the king and revealed what she had discovered, time in the palace stood still. According to royal insiders, Anne's tone was steady, but her words pierced like glass. "She's been recording us," she reportedly said. "Private meetings. Conversations. She's been hiding devices." King Charles, already burdened with the weight of a modern monarchy, sat motionless. Camilla, his ever-watchful partner, leaned forward slightly. Across the room, a senior advisor exchanged a glance with a security officer. No one spoke, because in that single, devastating moment, everything changed. The allegation was not just shocking, it was seismic. It wasn't about a slip of judgment. It was about betrayal. If true, it meant Meghan Markle, a woman once welcomed into the family with open arms, celebrated as a modern breath of fresh air, a symbol of change, had committed one of the highest unspoken sins in royal history. She had turned private moments into opportunities. She had, allegedly, placed hidden recording devices in rooms where the crown's inner workings were discussed. And for what? To leak? To blackmail? To sell? The motives were unclear, but the implication was unmistakable. The betrayal didn't just belong to one member of the family, it rippled through all of them. Because if private royal meetings had been compromised, it wasn't just an attack on the family. It was an attack on national security, diplomatic relations, and the very fabric of trust within the monarchy. This was not a minor infraction. This was unprecedented. And it wasn't the tabloids that broke the story. It was the family itself. So how did this all begin? How did Meghan, once hailed as a beacon of progress within a centuries-old institution, fall from grace so catastrophically that she was, in effect, banished? How did Princess Anne, the quiet force of the royal family, uncover something so deeply buried? And how did the palace, known for handling even the worst storms with silent dignity, decide that enough was enough? To answer these questions, we must go back, not just to the day of the discovery, but to the events that led up to it. Because this story isn't just about a single device or a whisper behind closed doors. It's about trust lost, power tested, and a royal family forced to defend itself from within. It began with whispers. Months before the confrontation, members of the royal household had begun to notice something odd. Meetings that were once sacred, strictly off the record, were becoming the subjects of oddly detailed tabloid leaks. Conversations held in confidence were turning up, barely paraphrased, in American media outlets, podcasts, and even public interviews with veiled references. At first, it was dismissed as coincidence. Perhaps someone from the inner circle was loose-lipped. Perhaps a guest or staff member had overheard something and spun it out of proportion. But the pattern didn't fade. In fact, it deepened. Private remarks, strategic decisions, even small family anecdotes meant only for a handful of ears were resurfacing in unexpected places. The details were too precise, too timely. And yet, the source remained elusive. Internally, suspicions grew. Some blamed lower-level staff. Others believed foreign media companies had employed private investigators. But Princess, and long known for her unwavering intuition and direct approach, had her own theory. And as it turns out, she was right, and began keeping track. She noted which meetings leaked and who had been present. She cross-referenced the content with who had access. Eventually, a disturbing pattern emerged. The meetings most affected were the ones where Meghan Markle had been present, either in person or via private call. It wasn't definitive proof. Not yet. But it was enough to investigate further. And, unlike some in the royal family, wasn't interested in scandal for its own sake. She didn't care for drama. She didn't play media games. But what she did care about was protecting the integrity of the crown. And when something threatened that, she acted. What happened next remains classified in many official records, but from what insiders suggest, and enlisted the help of a trusted royal aide with experience in security protocol. Together, they arranged to sweep several rooms of the palace for bugs, not with the fanfare of an official operation, but quietly, surgically. They used private security experts, ones who operated in the gray area between law enforcement and confidentiality. The results were chilling. In one room, used for informal debriefs after public events, a small device was found tucked beneath a carved antique table. It was no larger than a key. Not government-issued, but sophisticated enough to transmit audio recordings via short-range Bluetooth and long-range cloud sync when paired with a nearby device. Further sweeps uncovered more. A total of 3 devices, placed in locations that didn't just suggest coincidence, they suggested access. Intimate knowledge of the palace's rhythms. The kind of access only a family member or someone acting under their direction could possess. It was then that Princess made her move. She didn't approach Meghan directly. She didn't make a scene. She requested a private audience with King Charles, Camilla, William, and the most senior advisors of the crown. And in that quiet, guarded room, she laid out the evidence. No speculation, no gossip, just facts. The tension was unbearable. William reportedly clenched his jaw, silent, his eyes focused on the floor. Kate's expression darkened, not with rage, but with what one insider described as deep, crushing disappointment. For the king, the moment was doubly devastating. Charles had gone to great lengths to accommodate Meghan and Harry, to modernize the monarchy, to welcome them back after their exit. Now, with evidence of betrayal before him, he was forced to choose between family and institution. He chose the institution. The decision wasn't announced immediately. The palace took days, weeks even, to decide how to proceed. Lawyers were consulted. Security was tightened. Meghan's communications were quietly monitored. And then came the final step, a private meeting with Meghan herself, led by senior aides and, reportedly, attended by Prince Harry. What was said in that meeting remains confidential. But what we know is this: Meghan left, and she didn't return. There was no press statement, no photo op, just a discreet change in royal access, and eventually an updated status that made it clear Meghan Markle was no longer welcome within the trusted fold of the royal family. The public wouldn't know for several weeks. When the news finally reached the press, filtered through carefully chosen leaks and unnamed royal sources, it was explosive. But even then, most didn't realize the full depth of what had occurred. They knew something had shifted. They could see the absence. But the real story, the betrayal, the recordings, the confrontation, remained buried beneath layers of secrecy and discretion. Until now. In this video, we will uncover the full story behind Meghan's shocking departure. We will explore the investigation led by Princess and the reactions of the royal family, the possible motivations behind Meghan's alleged actions, and the ultimate fallout that shook the palace to its core. This is not just another chapter in the royal family's history. It's a cautionary tale about trust, power, and what happens when the most sacred traditions of one of the world's oldest institutions are violated from within. It was one of those rare moments within the royal walls when everything appeared to be running smoothly. Meetings had been held, ceremonial duties fulfilled, and even the atmosphere between family members, despite the usual tension, was measured and controlled. But beneath the grace of polished routines and perfectly timed photo ops, an undercurrent of unease had begun to form. What no one could yet confirm, but many had started to suspect, was that the walls themselves were no longer safe. And it wasn't the British press or tabloid sleuths who had infiltrated royal meetings. It wasn't foreign spies or rogue staff members either. The threat, it seemed, had come from within the family. Rumors of someone recording sensitive internal conversations first started to swirl in whispers between staff members during late-night corridor chats, after back-to-back meetings led to strangely coincidental leaks in the media. The timing of those leaks was too precise, the quotes too close to verbatim. Internal speculation became unease, and unease soon transformed into suspicion. Some thought it might be a clerk, others a junior aide. But over time, one figure continued to appear at the center of these confidential meetings and subsequent media storms: Meghan Markle. Meghan had maintained limited royal contact after stepping back from official duties, but she was still present for certain meetings, especially those concerning family planning, legacy branding, and charitable initiatives involving her and Harry. While her presence was usually framed as one of courtesy, insiders began to question her exact role in these gatherings. What tipped people off were not just the media leaks, but the detail. Private jokes mentioned in passing. Exact wording of phrases that had never been shared beyond the room. Concerns expressed by senior royals during internal family summits, now subtly appearing in celebrity interviews and sources close to articles in American publications. How did these observations find their way into public discourse? The breakthrough came, according to insiders, during a high-level strategy session inside Clarence House. Present at the time were King Charles, Camilla, Prince William, Princess Anne, and a handful of senior royal aides. The conversation had revolved around the family's public image, philanthropic legacy, and how best to address the growing tensions surrounding Prince Andrew's residual presence at certain ceremonial events. In that meeting, a particular line was said, one that would later be printed nearly verbatim in a foreign magazine's royal column. It was a line spoken in a low voice, in a private tone, by a senior royal, commenting on the need to move forward with discretion, not distraction. The line wasn't public. It wasn't printed in any press release. It was shared, in that form, with exactly 6 people. A week later, the quote surfaced online in a publication known for its favorable coverage of Meghan and Harry. The piece, attributed to a source close to the inner circle, detailed frustrations within the family, especially regarding the palace's attempt to present a united front amid private dysfunction. The writer described body language, side comments, and a level of behind-the-scenes insight that chilled those who had attended the meeting. It couldn't have been coincidence. Princess Anne reportedly approached King Charles privately and raised her concerns. Others had suspicions too, but Anne wasn't merely guessing, she had taken notes. She remembered who was present. She remembered who had entered the room, how long they stayed, and even what technology had been visible at the time. According to multiple royal aides, Meghan had attended several of these internal discussions virtually via private conference call systems or even in person under the guise of discussing joint projects or family inclusion. But it was during these sessions that red flags began to emerge. In one case, Meghan had placed her handbag on a chair beside her and didn't touch it for over an hour. One member of the royal staff later noted it was strangely positioned with the opening pointed upward, directly facing the central discussion. The same bag, it turns out, was a model known to contain a built-in digital recorder feature marketed for note-taking professionals. That same model was later found in tech forums with reviews praising its discreet functionality. It was a small detail, seemingly insignificant, but it stuck with the staff. After multiple such instances, especially where Meghan was the common denominator, senior advisors became increasingly cautious about what was said in her presence. The most critical turning point came when a maintenance worker doing routine AV inspections in one of the smaller royal meeting rooms discovered a foreign object lodged beneath an upholstered armrest. It was a micro-sized audio device, non-British made, capable of storing over 100 hours of high-quality conversation and transmitting wirelessly to nearby paired devices. Security protocols were immediately enacted. The room was swept. A second device was found in a room adjacent to the main meeting hall, this one cleverly hidden inside a decorative bowl of potpourri near the fireplace. Both devices had clearly been planted with access. This wasn't a tech failure. This wasn't a prank. It was deliberate. The devices were sent to private security experts contracted discreetly by the palace. After technical analysis, it was determined that the devices had been active during at least 2 known meetings involving both senior royals and Meghan. They contained sensitive conversations that, if made public, would have threatened not just reputations, but relationships with international allies and Commonwealth leaders. Princess Anne, upon receiving this report, demanded an immediate and personal briefing with the king and his most trusted inner circle. Her words were blunt. "There's only one person who's been in every room where we found these," she said. "And she's the one who has the most to gain." The palace didn't act immediately. They needed irrefutable proof, and for that, They initiated a new security measure, tracking any devices that attempted to sync or upload data during or immediately following meetings. Within days, a match occurred. During a casual sit-down involving King Charles and two other royals, a recording transmission ping was logged near the west wing of the estate. The signal matched the serial number of a device found earlier. Its destination? A secure email address linked to a US-based media account. The transmission was cut midstream, but the damage was done. The palace had what it needed. While Meghan was never publicly accused, nor was there a criminal investigation launched, largely to protect the crown from scandal, the internal decision was firm and swift. A senior royal official visited Harry and Meghan's residence and requested a private meeting. Meghan was reportedly confronted with the findings, not with accusations, but with statements of fact. No denials were issued, only silence. Within days, her scheduled meetings were canceled. Royal communications accounts scrubbed her name from various pages. And gradually, her status shifted from non-working royal to persona non grata. The world, meanwhile, remained largely unaware of the depth of what had occurred. They speculated on a family rift. They saw Meghan and Harry's growing distance from the rest of the royals as yet another chapter in their departure story. But those inside knew better. What had happened was not a story of miscommunication or generational misunderstanding. It was a calculated breach of trust, an attempt to turn the private sanctum of royalty into content. And it was Princess, and the one who rarely spoke to the press, who had stepped forward to protect the institution from within. To the public, Princess and is the stoic royal, practical, no-nonsense, and often content to stay outside the spotlight. She is neither interested in flashy headlines nor does she offer flowery interviews. But inside the palace walls, she is known for something far more crucial. She watches everything. Not in a gossipy, passive way, but with the sharpness of a soldier, the precision of a diplomat, and the loyalty of someone who understands the monarchy not as a ceremonial relic, but as a living legacy. When tensions within the royal household began to mount around the unusual leaks, word-for-word dialogue from private meetings, sensitive royal planning discussed in podcasts and tabloids, and didn't jump to conclusions. She took her time. She didn't react emotionally. She observed, gathered details, and, as always, relied on what she valued most, patterns. Princess and had been present at every major internal strategy meeting over the past year, especially those involving succession planning, future charity structures, and the redefinition of royal roles in the post-Megxit era. She had noticed, more than once, that after meetings involving Meghan Markle, whether via remote participation or in person, sensitive information seemed to trickle into the public space with uncanny accuracy. It wasn't just coincidence. At first, and chose silence, a strategy familiar to her since childhood. Raised in the shadow of Queen Elizabeth II's relentless discipline and had been taught to study before speaking, to observe before intervening. But silence is not passivity. It is preparation. She began reviewing records, nothing official at first, but with the help of her private secretary, she compiled a list of meeting attendees, media leaks, and known contacts. A curious overlap began to emerge. 3 meetings, in particular, had generated public quotes that were never intended to be shared. One at Windsor Castle, one at Sandringham, and one at Clarence House. Meghan had been present, or, more tellingly, had signed in remotely at all 3, and still wasn't ready to accuse. That wasn't her style. She needed facts, not theory. That's when she quietly requested assistance from the royal household's cybersecurity advisor, a discreet but highly skilled operative who had worked on encryption systems, threat assessments, and even quietly monitored the fallout from the Harry and Meghan Oprah interview. This advisor, sworn to absolute confidentiality, suggested a subtle surveillance method, tracing digital pings and syncing behavior from within royal estates without alerting anyone involved, and approved the plan. Not with glee, but with deep reluctance. She hated the idea of spying on family. But if the alternative meant letting the monarchy bleed out through betrayal, she had no choice. Within 2 weeks, they got their first hit. During a scheduled Royal Foundation meeting at Windsor, attended by Prince William, Kate, King Charles, and a select few advisors, a data signal was flagged transmitting from within the estate grounds. It wasn't a massive data dump, but it was active, live audio, beamed through an encrypted Bluetooth transmission to a nearby device. The address of origin? A communication line associated with a device registered in Meghan's name. The signal only lasted 3 minutes, but it was enough, and was immediately informed. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She called for a private conversation with King Charles that same evening. It was held in one of the smallest, oldest rooms in Buckingham Palace, a space few outsiders ever enter. The room was once Queen Mary's private retreat and had remained largely untouched, with faded tapestries and a singular wooden desk. Charles arrived with the expression of a man already suspecting the worst. He had heard the rumors, of course. Advisors had quietly warned him. But hearing it from someone whose loyalty was unimpeachable made it real. She walked him through the findings, timelines, device data, audio spikes, and most damning of all, the confirmed connection between the transmission signal and a device paired to Meghan's communications profile. Charles said very little. He closed his eyes. He asked only one question. Was she alone in this? And her reply was careful. I don't know. But the devices, they weren't planted by accident. The days that followed were tense. Charles informed his closest circle, Camilla, William, and the top legal advisor to the monarchy. All were stunned, but no one doubted Anne. Not because she had more power than the king, but because Anne had no interest in power. She was the monarchy's conscience, blunt, often overlooked, but always watching. William's reaction, according to palace sources, was one of fury, controlled but boiling. He reportedly walked out of the room after hearing the full details, fist clenched, jaw tight, offering no comment before disappearing into the gardens for over an hour. Kate was heartbroken. Not only had she spent years trying to bridge the gap between Meghan and the rest of the family, but she had also once believed Meghan would bring something refreshing and empathetic to the royal identity. Now, it appeared she had been used. Still, the palace did not act immediately. Legal advisors warned of potential fallout, accusations of surveillance, overreach, and, if the issue were leaked, public sympathy for Meghan. The monarchy was walking a tightrope, protect the institution without launching a public feud. It was Anne who brought clarity to the debate. We're not here to punish, she reportedly told Charles in a follow-up meeting. We're here to preserve. And if we let this slide, we give license for the next betrayal. And so, the palace devised a plan, one that would allow them to sever trust without inciting a media storm. They would call Meghan in, confront her with evidence, give her a chance to explain or deny, and based on her response, determine her future with the family. And did not attend the meeting. That task fell to the palace's private secretary and a royal legal advisor. Meghan, upon entering the room, was told of the security findings and shown, in neutral terms, the timeline and signal records. Her response, according to a person familiar with the exchange, was quiet and ambiguous. She neither admitted guilt nor offered a clear denial. She reportedly said, "I don't understand," several times. But when pressed about the devices, her answers became vague. She asked who else knew. She asked if Harry was informed. She did not ask about the recordings themselves. From that moment, the palace knew they had their answer. The final decision was made in a short, unrecorded gathering between Charles, William, and Anne. It was agreed that Meghan would no longer be invited to any royal meetings, even informally. Her presence at events would be discouraged unless protocol required it, and her name would quietly be removed from official internal communications. It wasn't a public banishment. There was no dramatic exile. It was something worse for someone who understood power. It was silence, exclusion, irrelevance, and for her part, never once gloated. She returned to her duties, visiting charities, attending regiments, speaking at agricultural events. She did not comment to the press. She did not leak her own role. She simply did what she had always done, protected the crown. And in doing so, she reminded everyone that silence does not mean absence. It can mean strength. It can mean duty. And sometimes, it means knowing exactly when to speak and when to act. The royal family, long known for its calm exterior and careful handling of public image, has experienced its fair share of scandal. From divorces and family feuds to abdications and controversial interviews, the monarchy has withstood storms that would shatter most institutions. Yet few events in recent history rattled the very core of their internal structure like the moment they discovered one of their own may have betrayed them, not through words, but through technology, intent, and deceit. The alleged revelation that Meghan Markle had attempted to secretly record royal family meetings hit like a thunderclap behind palace walls. And while it would never make the official record or appear in the court circular, those within the inner circle remember it as a defining moment, one that tested the resilience of blood ties and the limits of forgiveness. As the report was presented to King Charles III in a private briefing, complete with forensic documentation, tracking data, In behavioral observations, the reaction was not immediate outrage, it was silence. For several long minutes, those present said nothing. The king stared at the table in front of him. Aides held their breath. Princess Anne had already said her piece in a separate, earlier meeting. This was now Charles's moment to absorb the unimaginable. He did not shout. He did not pace. He simply asked, "Is it verified beyond doubt?" The answer from the royal security advisor was firm. "Yes, Your Majesty. It is." The betrayal, though technical in nature, struck deeply at the foundation of what the monarchy is built upon: discretion. Trust is everything inside the firm. Whether one is a senior working royal or a non-titled family member, there exists an unspoken code. Family disagreements are resolved in private. Deliberations about the future of the monarchy are held in sacred confidence. For centuries, this has been the rule. The idea that someone would deliberately break this code, not just by leaking, but by potentially planting devices, was more than an embarrassment. It was dangerous. The king reportedly closed the file, pushed it slightly forward, and then leaned back, eyes closed for a long time. "She's left us no choice," he finally said. Prince William, by contrast, was not so composed. As the heir to the throne, William has spent years walking a fine line between tradition and modernization. He has taken up the mantle of a future king with quiet strength, always mindful of how the public sees the monarchy's evolution. He and his wife, Catherine, had tried on more than one occasion to be the bridge between Meghan and the rest of the family. Now, it appeared that bridge had not only collapsed, it had been used against them. When informed of the discovery, William reportedly became visibly shaken. A palace insider described his demeanor as controlled but intense. He didn't raise his voice, but his words were sharp. "Do we have audio?" he asked. "Yes," came the reply, "but for internal review only." William reportedly shook his head. "And Harry? What does he know?" That question lingered in the air. At the time of the briefing, there was no indication that Prince Harry had been informed of the devices or that he had participated in any form of deception. But suspicion lingered. Could he have known? Could he have suspected? Would he defend her or the family? William didn't say much more during that meeting. But according to those present, he left early and spent the rest of the day in a private room of Kensington Palace, speaking only with Kate and his private secretary. For Catherine, Princess of Wales, the revelation hit differently. She had shared private moments with Meghan, sat beside her at events, confided in her, tried to offer her the same warmth and welcome that the late Queen Elizabeth II had once shown to Diana. The news that those moments may have been exploited, perhaps even recorded, left her quiet and introspective. "She looked heartbroken," said one aide. It wasn't anger. It was disappointment, deep disappointment. While the senior members processed the revelation, other parts of the palace went into immediate crisis mode. The communications office began preparing for potential leaks, not just to the media, but within staff circles. Rumors, once unleashed, could become headlines. The goal was containment. Staff were briefed to say nothing. Phone lines were monitored. Even email communication within the palace was temporarily restricted to secure lines. The Lord Chamberlain's office coordinated with royal security to reinforce confidentiality protocols. Meetings were rescheduled, room access lists tightened, and additional sweepings for surveillance were conducted in every wing of Buckingham Palace, Clarence House, and Sandringham. What they were dealing with was not just a rogue family member, it was a potential breach of sovereign privacy. And that required action on multiple fronts. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Charles reached out to Queen Camilla for counsel. Camilla, ever the steady confidant, advised caution but supported decisive action. She reportedly reminded the king that sometimes silence is more powerful than statements. Together, they agreed that there would be no immediate public comment, no royal press release, no spectacle. Instead, the palace would move quietly, but with finality. Meghan was contacted via private correspondence. It was not a letter signed by the king, but by the private secretary of the sovereign. The language was precise and formal, stripped of warmth, and made it clear that her presence was no longer welcome at confidential royal gatherings. Furthermore, she would no longer be considered eligible for insider access to family strategies, event planning, or ceremonial briefings. She would remain family in name, but not in practice. The royal household also took steps to protect the king's upcoming engagements. All meetings were relocated to secure locations. All mobile devices were banned from internal strategy sessions, a rule that hadn't been enforced so stringently in years. Even trusted aides were subjected to background revetting. Meanwhile, royal legal advisors drafted updated agreements for all royal guests and extended family members, clearly outlining non-disclosure expectations and the legal consequences of data gathering on royal grounds. It was, by all measures, a complete lockdown. As news of Meghan's distancing began to leak into the public through subtle changes in protocol, her absence from royal events, the sudden lack of mention in official documents, the media began speculating. Had there been another falling out? Why wasn't she included in the family's latest joint charity announcements? Where was she during the king's visit to Balmoral? The press didn't yet have the answer. But they could sense the tension. Some journalists began digging, piecing together breadcrumbs. Whispers of digital surveillance emerged on French sites. But most media outlets were too cautious to report without confirmation. The palace stayed silent. The decision to avoid a public confrontation was strategic. By not confirming or denying, the monarchy avoided inflaming the story and gave Meghan no opportunity to respond defensively through media channels. It also prevented the public from taking sides in what could easily become another divisive royal rift. But inside, the damage had been done. The trust was gone. And in its place, a quiet resolve began to form among the senior royals. Never again would the inner workings of the monarchy be taken for granted. Never again would a single individual be allowed to operate unchecked, even if they bore a title. The walls, quite literally, had ears, and from that point forward, the palace would make sure they belonged only to the trusted few. Perhaps the most telling response came not from statements or headlines, but from body language. At a public event weeks later, Prince William stood beside Princess, and as they greeted veterans at a commemorative service, a reporter asked a light question about family unity. William offered a tight smile, and with her usual firmness, replied simply, "Family unity is built on honesty." It was subtle, but it was loud. And in that moment, it became clear that the royal family had drawn a line, and that crossing it would come at a cost no one could afford to pay. Understanding Meghan Markle's alleged decision to secretly record private royal meetings requires moving past the headlines and into the complicated web of personal ambition, strained loyalty, emotional friction, and a growing hunger for influence beyond the gates of Buckingham Palace. To those who had once seen her as a breath of fresh air in a centuries-old institution, the idea that she may have breached royal trust in such a methodical way is both disillusioning and perplexing. But to others, especially those close to the family's inner workings, there were always signs, early hints of deeper motivations that would one day surface in more destructive forms. The question at the heart of this chapter is simple, but troubling. Why? What would drive a former actress-turned-duchess, someone who had received one of the most globally coveted titles, access to royal privilege, and the admiration of millions, to risk everything by allegedly recording confidential meetings? Was it purely financial? Was it part of a strategic media plan? Or was it something even more personal, something darker? The answer, as always in matters of power, is layered. To begin with, Meghan's life before royalty offers important context. As an actress on the television show Suits, she lived in a world where scripts, scenes, and soundbites mattered. Storytelling was currency, and control over one's narrative was everything. She was, by nature and by profession, hyper-aware of how moments could be repackaged, how voices, captured and framed properly, could be transformed into influence. When she stepped into royal life, Meghan brought with her a different sense of media literacy than any other Windsor had ever wielded. She understood the cycle. A single clip, a brief quote, could trigger a media storm or shape public perception overnight. And unlike the royals, who were trained to avoid headlines, Meghan knew how to use them. This fundamental difference between surviving the press and using it created friction from the start. Within months of marrying Prince Harry, Meghan began asserting herself behind palace walls. She wanted input on messaging, involvement in royal press releases, and influence over how she and Harry were being represented across platforms. While this wasn't entirely unwelcome, it was unprecedented. Royals did not control the narrative, they merely navigated it. But Meghan wanted more than navigation. She wanted authorship. Which brings us to the first possible motive, media leverage. Sources close to the palace suggest that by the time the Sussexes stepped back from their royal duties in 2020, Meghan had already been quietly laying the groundwork for an independent brand, one separate from the crown, and entirely in her control. The Oprah interview, their Netflix deal, and the Spotify podcast series all carry traces of one's central philosophy: tell your story before someone else tells it for you. But to build such a brand, content was king. Not just anecdotes, but insider knowledge. The kind of exclusive access that no outsider could replicate. And what's more exclusive than the raw, unfiltered conversations that happen in royal strategy sessions? The subtle tensions between siblings, the behind-the-scenes disagreements over protocol, the off-the-record thoughts of the monarch himself. These aren't just stories. They are assets. The palace, of course, knew this. And that's why discretion was sacrosanct. If Meghan truly did plant devices or use digital tools to capture these moments, it's possible she intended to build a library of content, ammunition, perhaps, for future interviews or memoirs, or as bargaining tools during negotiations with streaming platforms. The media world pays handsomely for insider exclusives, and the royalty of Britain is arguably the most guarded subject on earth. But money, while a compelling motive, may only be part of the equation. Another possibility, one increasingly discussed among royal analysts, is revenge. Meghan's entry into the royal family was, by all appearances, met with initial excitement and public adoration. Yet behind the polished photos and diplomatic appearances, her integration was anything but smooth. She clashed with aides, questioned protocol, and reportedly felt unsupported by both staff and senior royals. She later cited mental health struggles and isolation as reasons for her eventual departure, claims that sparked global debate and divided the public. Many believe that these experiences left her feeling not just hurt, but betrayed. If that is true, then perhaps the alleged recordings were not simply about money or influence, but about building a case, gathering evidence, keeping receipts. Consider this. In a world where narratives are often shaped by institutionally protected sources, having irrefutable proof of conversations, recordings, phrases, arguments, could serve as both shield and sword. It could vindicate her in the eyes of the public or act as leverage in a dispute that had gone far beyond family dynamics and into public perception. It is not unprecedented. In other spheres of power, politics, business, entertainment, high-profile individuals have used private recordings to defend themselves or expose wrongdoing. If Meghan believed she was being mistreated, misunderstood, or unfairly portrayed, she may have seen the recordings as her last line of protection. And yet, there remains a third possibility, one perhaps more subtle, but equally powerful: control. In her former life, Meghan had agency. She was a creator, a producer of content, a public speaker. But in royal life, that agency diminished. Everything was curated, managed, filtered through centuries of etiquette and hierarchy. For someone who had spent years building her own identity, this loss of autonomy could have been suffocating. By allegedly recording private meetings, Meghan may have been attempting to reclaim a sense of control over what was said, over how it was remembered, and over how she would ultimately be perceived. In her view, the palace held the power to rewrite events, suppress narratives, and protect its image at all costs. Perhaps, by recording these moments, she was taking back her power, ensuring that if she ever needed the truth, it would be on her side. However, this perspective ignores one critical truth. Inside the monarchy, power is always borrowed, never owned. And those who forget that rule are eventually reminded. Within days of the discovery, royal insiders noted that Meghan's team had gone unusually quiet. No interviews, no Instagram quotes, no subtle PR campaigns hinting at unfair treatment. There was silence. One theory is that she had been warned, formally or informally, that pushing back would only make things worse. Another theory is that she was shocked, that she had underestimated how deeply the family would take this breach, or how swiftly they would act once convinced of her betrayal. In either case, the damage was done. For the royals, the motive mattered less than the act itself. Whether it was money, control, revenge, or fear, once the trust was broken, it couldn't be rebuilt. And yet, among the royal staff, discussions continued. Some still speculated that she hadn't acted alone. Could others have encouraged it? Could advisors or media consultants have planted the idea as a defensive measure? Or had Meghan, feeling increasingly isolated, taken matters into her own hands without telling anyone, not even Harry? If the latter is true, then it may explain why Harry's reaction, at least initially, was not public. Perhaps he, too, was blindsided. Perhaps he, too, didn't know. Or perhaps he did, and chose silence over scandal. Either way, the palace's internal investigation into motives eventually stopped. Not because the questions had been answered, but because the outcome had been reached. Meghan was removed from internal participation. Her influence over royal matters was severed, and from that point on, her path would remain her own, no longer woven into the royal tapestry she once embraced, then challenged, and finally departed. The royal family is no stranger to crisis. But every so often, an incident occurs that doesn't just require response, it demands recalibration. The revelation that Meghan Markle had allegedly placed or authorized recording devices inside royal residences shook the foundation of an institution built on secrecy, discretion, and the sanctity of private conversation. The monarchy had survived wars, abdications, divorces, and public opinion shifts. But this was different. This was a violation from within. And once the truth came out, the consequences were swift, calculated, and deliberately quiet. There was no emergency press conference, no dramatic statement issued from the gates of Buckingham Palace. But inside, behind the scenes, the machinery of royal damage control shifted into its highest gear. The family knew that while the public hadn't been given the full story yet, rumors would soon swirl. And if not managed carefully, the fallout could irreparably stain the very concept of unity the monarchy depended on. The first change was logistical, where meetings happened, who attended them, and how those individuals were vetted. Every meeting room within royal residences was swept by technical security teams not once, but 3 separate times. Devices were confiscated from even the most trusted aides. Advisors who had enjoyed years of free movement were suddenly restricted to designated zones. Entry into sensitive meetings now required prior clearance, biometric ID, and a full scan for digital equipment, even for family members. This wasn't just a precaution. It was a reset. For those inside the palace, it was a chilling shift. Aides who had worked for the family for over a decade described the atmosphere as tense but eerily focused. Staff meetings included briefings not just on scheduling or ceremonial matters, but on security threats, something previously reserved for major events or high-risk state visits. Meghan's name was never uttered openly, but everyone knew the reason for the abrupt change. It was as if the air inside the palace had changed, warmer in some corridors, colder in others. People spoke more cautiously. Conversations that once happened over tea were now being had behind closed doors. It was understood that everything was being monitored and logged. Trust had become a currency so rare that even those closest to the crown had to earn it again. Meanwhile, in the public eye, the effects were more subtle but unmistakable. Meghan's name began disappearing from official correspondence. Royal websites removed references to her involvement in recent joint initiatives. Photos of the Duchess from certain galleries quietly vanished, replaced by more generic images of ongoing projects. Her attendance at future royal events was no longer announced in advance because she was no longer invited. Perhaps the most telling sign came from event planning. For months, Meghan had been slated to appear at a global charitable summit hosted by one of the king's patronages. The event, which included participation from royals across Europe and the Commonwealth, was considered a key opportunity to demonstrate unity across royal generations. Meghan's planned speech had already been ghostwritten and reviewed, but her name was removed from the itinerary overnight. No announcement, no explanation. She simply ceased to exist in the royal calendar. Back in the U.S., the media began to speculate. Commentators asked why Meghan had been missing from recent public appearances, why her official portrait hadn't been updated on royal platforms, why she hadn't released any statements or attended events with Harry. The palace, sticking to its time-honored strategy, said nothing. But the silence itself was a message. In private circles, however, the impact was immediate and far more personal. Senior royals withdrew further into themselves. Prince William, who had already distanced himself from his brother in the years since the infamous Oprah interview, made no contact with Meghan or Harry during the weeks following the internal investigation. Sources say he issued a single private message to Harry, not out of reconciliation, but to reiterate that their father's health and the institution's reputation came first. Kate Middleton, often seen as a diplomatic buffer between the two brothers, was said to be devastated, not only by the betrayal itself but by what it meant for the future of her children and their exposure to internal discussions. She reportedly began holding more family-centered meetings with her staff in private residences instead of formal offices, just to create a space where she felt safe again. Queen Camilla, meanwhile, advised Charles to minimize further engagement with Meghan indefinitely. She had been among the first to quietly raise concerns about Meghan's media relationships in the early days of her royal life, and now felt vindicated, though not pleased. She wanted to believe it would never come to this, one insider said. But perhaps the most visible and symbolic moment of consequence came during a quiet weekend at Balmoral. It was tradition. Royal family members often spent holidays or private retreats at the Scottish estate, away from the public. That particular weekend, Harry had reportedly requested to bring Meghan along for a brief visit. While the invitation was extended to Harry, Meghan was politely excluded. She would not be welcomed on the property at that time, the palace advised. It was the first formal, nonverbal expression of her new status, separate. Outside. No longer a participant in the family unit. To make matters worse for Meghan, this change in her position had ripple effects beyond the royal family. Her partnerships, commercial and philanthropic, began to shift. Some brands that had previously collaborated with her for joint causes began reevaluating. Without the royal tie, Meghan's aura had changed. She was still high-profile, but no longer regal. No longer trusted. A few pulled out quietly. Others paused indefinitely. Even her media deals began to reflect the strain. Discussions around new projects, previously fast-tracked because of her exclusive access, now faced more scrutiny. Streaming companies reportedly began reevaluating their contracts, unsure of what content she could still provide. What could she reveal now? What could she use without triggering a legal firestorm? And in the world of diplomacy, where Meghan had hoped to position herself as a global humanitarian voice, doors began to close, softly but firmly. Diplomatic event planners from the UN, the World Health Organization, and other forums began excluding her from summit invitations or panels that required active royal endorsement. Not because she had broken a law, but because she had broken an unspoken agreement that her access to the royals came with conditions. And once that access was lost, so too was her perceived legitimacy in those circles. Prince Harry, too, felt the impact. While he remained a blood royal, the tension between him and the institution widened. His attempts to shield Meghan from consequences were noted, but not reciprocated. He found himself in the difficult position of being welcomed at ceremonial events, but seated further from senior family members. Included, but peripheral. Respected, but watched. The once close bond between the brothers remained fractured. Behind closed doors, aides began preparing for potential legal escalation if Meghan chose to push back, to demand clarity, or to seek re-entry. But she didn't. Whether out of legal caution, emotional shock, or strategic retreat, Meghan stayed silent. No interviews, no statements, no denials, only quiet. And that, in its own way, spoke louder than any interview could. The royal family, for all its pomp and pageantry, knows how to protect itself when wounded. It doesn't roar. It closes ranks. And in the weeks following the discovery of the alleged recordings, that's exactly what it did. The message was unmistakable. Betrayal, no matter how quietly it arrives, has consequences. And when the walls of the palace are breached, the doors do not remain open. When whispers from the inside of Buckingham Palace began to drift beyond the gates and into the media's hungry hands, what started as discreet speculation quickly exploded into a full-blown global scandal. The very idea that Meghan Markle, once considered a progressive breath of fresh air in the British monarchy, had allegedly attempted to secretly record private royal meetings sent shockwaves across continents. It wasn't just the action itself that ignited the firestorm, but the layers of betrayal, privacy invasion, and royal tension that fueled the world's imagination. The media, both traditional and digital, sprang into action. In the UK, where the press has a long and often combative relationship with Meghan, the coverage was relentless. Tabloid headlines ranged from speculative to explosive. Spy in the palace? Meghan's secret tapes. Royal meetings bugged. While Buckingham Palace had made no official public comment, the absence of denial only deepened the story's credibility. The Times, usually more reserved, ran a front-page article titled, "Trust Fractured, Palace Leak Triggers Royal Reset." The Daily Mail was far less restrained. Their Sunday edition featured a sprawling spread, accompanied by digitally enhanced images of Kensington Palace overlaid with fictitious hidden camera graphics. The implication was clear. The royal family had been under surveillance from within. The British public responded with a mixture of fury, fascination, and disbelief. Talk shows lit up with debates. Morning radio hosts questioned the ethics of privacy within the monarchy, while evening pundits examined Meghan's motivations with surgical precision. Call-in programs received floods of messages, with callers voicing concern over how deeply Meghan had ever really respected the crown. She came for the spotlight, one caller argued, not the service. Another said, "This is treason." not in a court of law, but in the court of trust. Public polls conducted within a week of the first major media reports revealed a dramatic shift. A YouGov survey showed that 68% of Britons now viewed Meghan Markle unfavorably, the highest rating since the couple's departure from royal duties in 2020. Among senior citizens, the number climbed above 80%. Even younger demographics, previously more supportive, were beginning to sour. Only 34% of 18 to 24-year-olds viewed Meghan positively, down from 52% just 6 months prior. In the U.S., reactions were more polarized, but no less intense. Mainstream American outlets initially approached the story with caution. CNN, NBC, and ABC issued balanced reports, citing unnamed sources and emphasizing the palace's silence. But as the story gained traction, even they began digging deeper. CBS's Gayle King, a known friend of Meghan, was noticeably more muted than usual when covering the allegations. Meanwhile, media watchdogs and conservative platforms ran with the narrative, portraying Meghan as manipulative and opportunistic. Fox News aired a primetime segment titled, "The Duchess of Deceit," while the New York Post ran with, "Royals Rattled. Meghan's Secret Recordings Rock the Monarchy." Across YouTube and independent commentary channels, the story became content gold. Some creators released hour-long breakdowns of the scandal, pulling together footage, past interviews, and speculative connections with investigative intensity. Social media was an inferno. On Twitter, now X, hashtags like #MeghanSpygate, #RoyalBetrayal, and #RecordingRoyals trended for days. TikTok creators recreated what really happened in satirical sketches and dramatic reenactments. Instagram accounts devoted to royal drama flooded their feeds with conspiracy boards and alleged timelines. Reddit threads exploded with theorists arguing over when Meghan might have begun recording, what she could have captured, and why she hadn't yet denied the claims. Memes, parodies, and AI-generated audio leaks began circulating, none of them verified, but all widely shared. The line between fact and fiction blurred, as the digital public morphed Meghan into a caricature of palace espionage. Even world leaders, though cautious, weighed in indirectly. In Canada, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was asked whether this incident could affect public opinion about the monarchy's future in the Commonwealth. He avoided specifics, but noted, "Trust in leadership matters. When it breaks down, institutions suffer." In Australia, Republican movements seized the moment, with one opposition figure tweeting, "If Buckingham Palace can't protect its own privacy, why should it oversee ours?" But not all the backlash was directed at Meghan. A vocal minority defended her, questioning whether the recordings, if they existed, were really the ultimate betrayal the media was making them out to be. They pointed to how deeply scrutinized Meghan had always been, and speculated that the alleged recordings may have been for self-protection, not sabotage. Some critics of the monarchy suggested that the royals were using Meghan as a scapegoat for internal instability, punishing her for asserting autonomy. Celebrity allies of Meghan, including a few from Hollywood and the social activism community, posted cryptic messages of support. One actress tweeted, "When a woman speaks her truth, they call it treason." Another influencer posted a photo of Meghan with the caption, "Silence isn't guilt, it's grace under fire." Still, these voices were drowned out by the sheer volume of outrage. Public trust in Meghan plummeted. Her charitable foundation saw a temporary freeze in donations. A partnership deal with a lifestyle brand was reportedly paused pending internal review. Speaking engagements were quietly dropped. Event organizers didn't want the distraction. The smell of scandal, especially one involving secret surveillance, was too toxic to risk proximity. Meanwhile, royal commentators with decades of experience began reflecting on the deeper implications. Richard Eden, of the Daily Mail, described the scandal as the most egregious internal violation since Wallace Simpson. Historian Robert Lacey, who had previously advised Netflix's The Crown, said, "What's most striking is not that someone recorded the royals, it's that they were part of the family. That's the line that's never been crossed until now." The royal household, as expected, remained publicly silent. No statements were issued, no interviews given, but insiders confirmed that the family had begun reviewing its own internal protocols. From now on, attendance at royal meetings would be reduced to only those deemed essential. Digital devices would be restricted. All family guests, even royals, would be required to sign enhanced privacy agreements, an unprecedented shift in palace dynamics. Prince Harry, though not directly accused, found himself at the center of debate. Was he complicit? Was he unaware? Or was he caught in the middle, trapped between the family he was born into and the woman he had chosen? His silence, like Meghan's, fueled further speculation. While some defended him as a man trying to protect his wife, others saw him as passive or enabling. The once bright image of Harry as a royal rebel had now grown dimmer, clouded by association with an act so antithetical to royal values. Then came the public. Outside the palace gates, crowds began gathering again, not in protest, but in fascination. Tourists posed for photos while asking, "Is she still allowed in there?" Souvenir shops sold mugs reading "Bugged by Meghan." A cottage industry of scandal had been born. For the monarchy, the scandal wasn't just about one person. It was about the institution. It was about setting an example. It was about drawing a line. And for Meghan, the storm was more than just bad press. It was a reckoning, a moment where choices made in the shadows were dragged into the light. Whatever the motives, whatever the context, one truth had become unshakable in the eyes of the world. The royal family may forgive many things, but betrayal of their inner sanctum, through deceit and secrecy, carries consequences that no title or apology can erase. It happened without ceremony. No fanfare, no public announcement. No motorcade was seen arriving, and no photograph was taken outside the gates. And yet, within the ancient walls of Windsor Castle on a cold, gray afternoon, one of the most defining conversations in modern royal history took place. This was not a scheduled audience or a formal family gathering. It was a private, closed-door meeting between senior palace officials, King Charles, and the woman who had once been heralded as a new era for the British monarchy, Meghan Markle. For weeks, tension had swirled silently inside the palace following the internal investigation. The discovery of unauthorized recording devices in rooms Meghan had access to was no longer a suspicion. It was a confirmed breach. Though no criminal charges were being pursued, the monarchy had its own form of justice: exile from within. Now came the moment to inform her. But this wasn't going to be handled through email or a secondhand message. It required face-to-face confrontation, cold, clinical, and irreversible. The logistics of arranging the meeting had been agonizing. Palace aides debated over the tone. Should it be formal or informal? Should the king himself deliver the message, or should the responsibility fall to an intermediary? In the end, King Charles insisted on being present. He believed that when one chapter closes, it should do so with clarity. Meghan arrived alone. Harry, according to insiders, had been informed of the meeting but chose not to attend. Whether out of disagreement, emotional distance, or internal conflict remains unknown. His absence was noted, but not unexpected. The rift between him and the rest of the family had widened in recent months, and this new development only deepened the void. Meghan was escorted through the service entrance of Windsor's private wing, a decision made not to shame her, but to keep her arrival hidden from view. Security was tight. Staff had been given the day off in that wing, save for a few trusted aides. The meeting room was stark and quiet, chosen deliberately for its lack of grandeur. This wasn't a court or a courtroom. It was a conversation space, but one weighted with finality. Present in the room were King Charles, his private secretary, the Lord Chamberlain, and the royal family's senior legal advisor. A chair was set opposite them, already prepared. Meghan entered wearing a neutral-colored coat, her hair tied back, her expression unreadable. The king began. According to multiple insider accounts, Charles was calm but firm. There was no shouting, no emotional display. He referred to the internal security investigation findings, the audio transmissions that had been traced back to her device, and the confirmed presence of hardware that breached royal privacy. He didn't accuse her of espionage. He didn't even question her motives. Instead, he made one point clear: a sacred boundary had been crossed. What followed was a speech prepared days earlier by his team, deliberately devoid of emotion, rich in legal language, and structured to remove ambiguity. Meghan was informed that as a result of the confirmed breach, she would no longer be permitted to attend royal meetings, briefings, or strategy sessions in any capacity. Her access to internal palace communications had been revoked. Her patronages granted through royal appointment were now under formal review and subject to reassignment. Any future attendance at state or ceremonial events would be at the discretion of the sovereign and subject to case-by-case approval. Her Royal Highness styling, already in use by choice, would now be permanently barred from official use across all royal documentation. The statement concluded by thanking her for her previous work on charitable initiatives and wished her well in future endeavors. Meghan remained silent throughout most of the reading. Only once, according to an eyewitness, did she speak. "I never meant for it to come to this," she reportedly said, "but I guess it was always going to, wasn't it?" There was no apology, no denial, just that single line, quiet, resigned, and strangely reflective. The king, in response, simply nodded. "What matters now is how we move forward," he said. "For the institution. For the family." The meeting lasted less than 40 minutes. Meghan stood, thanked the members present for their time, and walked out of the room with steady steps. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. Some who witnessed the scene later said it was as though she had made peace with the outcome long before the words were ever spoken. Her car, parked discreetly in the rear court, drove her back to Frogmore Cottage, still technically her and Harry's UK residence, though it had already been marked for relinquishment later that year. There, she spent the remainder of the day out of sight. Her team issued no statement. Her spokesperson did not take calls. No Instagram posts, no media leaks. Just silence. In the following days, changes were immediate. Her photo was removed from the internal staff wall in the palace's public affairs office. Digital keys previously connected to her mobile devices were disabled. Briefings prepared for upcoming events were revised, now excluding her entirely. Invitations to international summits, forums, and global panels began to dry up. Even among her circle of US-based connections, there was a subtle but noticeable retreat. Event organizers now referred to her not as a royal representative, but as a public figure. Bookings that once referred to her as Duchess began replacing that title with actress, activist, and entrepreneur. The expulsion was not publicized. It didn't need to be. The world knew. The royals had made their statement, not with words, but with structure. And for an institution built on subtlety, that silence spoke volumes. Among the family, the aftermath left scars. Prince William reportedly did not reach out to Meghan after the meeting. He viewed the incident not as a family issue, but as an institutional breach. To him, forgiveness was not the priority, preservation was. Kate, still hurt by what she viewed as personal betrayal, also kept her distance. Charles, though composed in his delivery, remained saddened by the outcome. According to his close staff, he had hoped that Meghan might someday reintegrate quietly into the family fold, even from a distance. That hope, however fragile, had now been extinguished. Harry, torn between loyalty to his wife and the institution of his birth, said nothing publicly. His presence in family life grew quieter, more peripheral. Though still invited to key events, his role now carried the weight of loss of proximity, loss of trust, and, perhaps most painfully, loss of potential. The dream that Harry and Meghan could serve as a modern counterbalance to the traditional firm had crumbled entirely. The final meeting marked not just a decision, it marked an end. It ended the era in which Meghan Markle stood as both Duchess and disruptor. It ended any remaining illusion that reconciliation, at least institutionally, was possible. And it ended a chapter of royal history defined by conflict, hope, and finally, closure. From this point forward, Meghan would remain a figure on the outside. No longer a participant in the crown's future. No longer a royal voice in royal rooms. Just a name on the family tree, connected by law, but cut off by choice. There are few moments in a man's life where every facet of his identity collides. For Prince Harry, the aftermath of Meghan Markle's alleged recordings and her silent expulsion from the inner royal circle was one of those moments. In that collision stood his name, his title, his lineage, his love, his pain, and most of all, his choice. A choice that was never supposed to exist in this form, between the woman he had vowed to protect and the family that had defined him since birth. In the hours following Meghan's closed-door meeting with King Charles and the royal household, Harry remained distant, both physically and emotionally. He was not at Windsor Castle. He was not in Kensington. He wasn't even in the city. According to those close to his security detail, he had taken time alone at a secluded countryside residence far outside of London, reportedly in deep contemplation. This wasn't the first time he'd felt divided, but it was perhaps the first time the consequences were so final. Ever since he met Meghan, Harry had battled with the walls of the monarchy, walls that had once shielded him, and later, suffocated him. He had always felt like the spare, the understudy, the royal who was free in title but bound in tradition. Meghan had awakened something in him, an urgency to protect, to reclaim, to rewrite his role. But now, the past had caught up with the present. Meghan had crossed a line that, in the eyes of his family, could never be uncrossed. For the king, the situation was clear. For William, it was closed. For Harry, it was torment. Sources close to the family say that after the discovery of the devices, Harry was presented with the findings before Meghan was officially summoned for her meeting. He was shown a summary of the evidence, the data logs, the digital fingerprints, and the audio signatures. When asked if he knew of Meghan's actions, he reportedly replied with 2 words, "I didn't." But whether he knew or not, the implications were the same. His wife had allegedly recorded, or attempted to record, private royal proceedings. And now she was facing the full consequences of that betrayal. Harry, in turn, had to face the fallout of standing beside her or walking away. What made the decision even more difficult was the silence. Meghan had said nothing to the press. She offered no defense, no public rebuttal. Harry understood that the silence, though tactical, also increased suspicion. Without a denial, the world would believe guilt. And without a defense, the palace would proceed unchallenged. He was trapped between a family that demanded loyalty and a wife who needed protection. In the days after the meeting, Harry met privately with King Charles, not in an office, but in one of the drawing rooms of Clarence House. The meeting was not formal. It was father and son. Those close to the discussion say that Charles remained composed but firm. He did not attack Meghan's character. He did not accuse Harry of collusion. But he did speak as a father to his son who had chosen a path that now stood at odds with the crown. "You've asked me before if there's a way back," Charles reportedly said. "I believe in family. But family is built on trust. And trust has been lost." Harry reportedly asked one thing: "Can it be rebuilt?" To which Charles replied, "Not if it keeps being tested." The conversation ended without resolution. No ultimatums. No agreements. Just a mutual understanding that the foundation between them had cracked, and that rebuilding it would take more than time. It would take actions. It would take Meghan making amends, a prospect that, at this point, seemed increasingly unlikely. Meanwhile, William's position was far less forgiving. Insiders say that when Harry attempted to reach out via private messaging in the days following Meghan's formal dismissal, William did not respond. Not directly. His private secretary sent a brief acknowledgement. But the message was unmistakable. William was done trying. For William, the betrayal was personal. This wasn't just about royal meetings. It was about family discussions, children's futures, inheritance strategies, and vulnerable moments shared in what should have been sacred privacy. Meghan had shattered that, and William saw no path back from it. Kate, while less vocal, supported William's stance. Her disappointment was quieter, but no less deep. She had once envisioned a future where their children, George, Charlotte, Louis, and Archie, could grow up connected, cousins by blood and bond. Now, that dream felt distant. Harry, caught between those cold stares in the quiet home he shared with Meghan in California, found himself increasingly isolated. Back in the U.S., things weren't much better. The media frenzy surrounding the recordings placed immense pressure on Harry's image. Some American outlets painted him as complicit. Others painted him as trapped. Editorials asked if he had lost his family forever. Pundits questioned whether the split had now become permanent.